Good morning, scholars. Happy Monday. Today we're going to spend some time reading about Mr. Toad again. So we met him briefly in our story before, but he's going to come back into play today. All you will need is your pencil and a skills packet if you have extra time. Then by the end of today, you will turn in Monday, September 21st, ELA. So here's the first place that we met Mr. Toad when Mole and Rat went to call on him at his home. Our objective today is to describe main characters using character traits. We'll do the read aloud. Some of you will have the beginning of your assessment to continue. We will then submit our exit ticket. So for today, like the last couple of days, you do not have slides to follow along in. You'll just have an exit ticket to complete at the end. So pay attention to these vocabulary words. They might come up in your exit ticket. Our first word today is conceited. Say it. Conceited. And this is having a very high opinion of yourself, thinking that you are the best. Our next word is sensible. Say it. Sensible. And that's using, having, or showing good judgment. And now let's go ahead and dive into our story about Mr. Toad. It was a bright morning in the early part of summer. The mole and the water rat had been up since dawn discussing the joys of boating. They were finishing breakfast when a heavy knock sounded at the door. So when we last left our story, it was winter, and now it's summer. So a little bit of time has passed. The mole went to the door, and the rat heard him utter a cry of surprise. Then he flung the door open and announced, "Mr. Badger!" The badger strode into the room and stood looking at the two animals with an expression full of seriousness. "The hour has come," said the badger at last. "What hour?" asked the rat uneasily, glancing at the clock on the mantelpiece. "Whose hour, you should say," replied the badger. "Why, Toad's hour. The hour of Toad. I said I would take him in hand as soon as the winter was over, and I'm going to take him in hand today." "Toad's hour, of course," cried the mole delightedly. "It has been brought to my attention," continued the badger, "that another new motor car will arrive at Toad Hall today. You two animals will accompany me to Toad Hall, and the work of rescue shall begin." "Right you are," cried the rat enthusiastically. They set off immediately on their mission of mercy. So if you remember a little bit back in our story, Badger had responded to Rat that he couldn't do anything because it was the off season, and no animals expected to do anything in the off season of winter. But now the winter's over, and so it's time to do something about Toad. And they said that they needed to do something before he had too many wrecks, caused too many fines, or he ended up dead because he hurt himself. And now they see that he's ordered a new motor car. So that can mean nothing good. So here they are at Toad's house with his shiny new motor car. They reached Toad Hall to find a shiny new motor car parked in the driveway. As they neared the front door, it was flung open, and Mr. Toad, attired in his driving clothes, came swaggering down the steps. "Hello," he cried cheerfully. "You're just in time to come with me for a jolly. Toad's words faltered as he noticed the stern look on the faces of his friends. The badger strode up the steps. "Take him inside," he said to his companions. Then, as Toad was hustled through the door, he turned to the chauffeur in charge of the new motor car. "I'm afraid you won't be wanted today," he said. "Mr. Toad has changed his mind." With that, the badger followed the others inside and shut the front door. "Now then," he said to the toad, when the four of them stood together in the hall, "take those ridiculous things off." "Shan't," replied the toad with great spirit. "Take them off him, then, you two," ordered the badger. They had to lay Toad out on the floor before they could get to work properly. Then the rat sat on him, and the mole got his motor clothes off him, bit by bit. "You knew it must come to this, Toad," the badger exclaimed. "You've disregarded all the warnings we've given you. You've gone on squandering the money your father left you, and you're constantly getting into trouble with the police. You're giving us animals a bad name in the area. Now you will come with me into the library, and there we will have a serious heart-to-heart. So Badger means business right now. He's not changing his mind at all. He's not here to discuss. He is here to lecture Toad about his choices. I'm saying he's gone too far. And here they are, having the stern discussion. He took Toad firmly by the arm and led him into the library. About 3/4 of an hour, the Badger reappeared, solemnly leading by the paw a very dejected Toad. So we know that word means sad or depressed. Sit down there, Toad, said the Badger kindly, pointing to a chair. My friends, he went on, I am pleased to inform you that Toad has seen the error of his ways. That is very good news, said the Mole gravely. Very good news indeed, observed the Rat dubiously. If only. He was looking very hard at Toad as he said this, and he could not help thinking he perceived something like a twinkle in that animal's eye. So Badger went into this room with Toad, and 3/4 of an hour later, so less than an hour later, they're back out, and he says that Toad's seen the error of his ways, but he notices a twinkle in his eye. So we're thinking he might not have actually changed his mind. There's only one more thing to be done, continued the Badger. Toad, I want you to repeat before your friends here that you see the error of your ways. There was a long, long pause. Toad looked desperately this way and that. At last he spoke. No, he said quite firmly. I admit nothing. What? Cried the Badger. Didn't you just tell me now? In there. Oh, yes, in there, said Toad impatiently. I'd have said anything in there. You're so persuasive, dear Badger. Then you don't promise, said the Badger, never to touch a motor car again? Certainly not, replied Toad. Told you so, observed the Rat to the Mole. Very well, then, said the Badger firmly. We'll have to see what force can do. You've often asked us three to come and stay with you, Toad. Well, now we're going to. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him up in his bedroom. So Badger seems very angry right now. He thought he'd talked some sense into Toad, but it turns out he hadn't. Toad was just being evasive and trying to get out of this room in what looks like a very tense situation with Badger. And now that he's out of that situation, he said, of course I'm still going to drive a motor car. So now Badger's going beyond persuasion, and he's moving on to force. They are going to lock him in his room. We'll take great care of everything till you're well, Toad, said the Mole, as Toad was hauled up the stairs. No more of those regrettable incidents with the police, Toad, said the Rat, as they thrust him into his bedroom and locked the door. They descended the stair, Toad shouting abuse at them through the keyhole, and the three friends sat down to discuss the matter. So that term, shouting abuse, it's a British way of saying that Toad was angrily yelling at the others and calling them names. So it was very unkind. Toad must never be left unguarded, said the Badger firmly. The Mole and the Rat nodded in agreement. They arranged watches accordingly. At first, Toad resisted their efforts, but as time passed, however, he appeared to grow depressed. One fine morning, the Rat, whose turn it was to go on duty, went upstairs to relieve Badger. Toad's still in bed, Badger told the Rat. Now you look out, Rat. When Toad's quiet and submissive, then he's at his trickiest. And with that warning, the Badger departed. How are you today? Inquired the Rat cheerfully as he approached Toad. A feeble voice replied, Thank you so much, dear Ratty. So good of you to inquire. But first, tell me how you are yourself, and the excellent Mole. Oh, we're all right, replied the Rat. Mole, he added innocently, is going out for a run with the Badger. Now jump up, and don't lie moping there on a fine morning like this. Dear kind Rat, murmured Toad, I can't jump up now, if ever. I hate being a burden, and I do not expect to be one much longer. Well, I hope not too, said the Rat heartily. I'm a nuisance, I know, replied the Toad. You are indeed, said the Rat, but I tell you I'd take on any trouble on earth for you, if only you'd be a sensible animal. If I thought that, Ratty, murmured Toad, then I would beg you to fetch a doctor. Why, what do you want a doctor for? Inquired the Rat. Surely you have noticed of late, murmured Toad. But no, why should you? Never mind, forget that I asked. Look here, said the rat, beginning to get worried. Of course I'll fetch a doctor if you really think you need one, but you can hardly be bad enough for that yet. Let's talk about something else. I fear, dear friend, said Toad, that talk can do little for me. And by the way, if you do fetch a doctor, would you mind fetching a lawyer too? So, in this case, do you think that Toad really needs a doctor or a lawyer? It seems unlikely, and we have to think the reason he's asking for them, might be related to Badger's warning. Badger told Rat that when he is at his most solemn, his most down, he's also at his most tricky. So this seems like Toad might have something up his sleeves. A lawyer! Oh, gracious me, the concerned rat said to himself as he hurried from the room, not forgetting, however, to lock the door behind him. Outside, he stopped only for a moment to consider Toad's behavior before running off to the village on his errand of mercy. So Rat did buy into everything Toad was saying, and he's off to fetch a doctor and a lawyer for his friend. And here we see that might not have been such a good idea. As the key turned in the lock, Toad hopped out of bed. Toad watched Rat from the window until he was out of sight. Laughing heartily, Toad dressed quickly in his best suit, filled his pockets with cash, and improvised a rope by knotting sheets from his bed together. Tying one end of the rope around the strongest part of the window, Toad slid lightly to the ground, and taking the opposite direction to the rat, marched off light-heartedly, whistling a merry tune. It was a gloomy luncheon for Rat when the Badger and the Mole returned. He did it awfully well, said the crestfallen rat. He did you awfully well, replied the Badger hotly. He's got clear away for now, and the worst of it is, he'll be so conceited with what he'll think is his cleverness that he may commit any folly. But we'd better stay here. Toad may be brought back any moment on a stretcher or between two policemen. So Badger's pretty angry with Rat right now. He's accusing him of being tricked, and Rat is saying that he was very convincing, but Badger's not convinced. Meanwhile, Toad was walking briskly along a main road. Smart piece of work that, he remarked to himself. With this thought in mind, he strode along till he reached a little town, where the sign of the Red Lion reminded him that he was hungry. He marched into the inn and ordered lunch. He was about halfway through his meal when a familiar sound made him jump. The glorious sound of a motor car could be heard in the inn yard. Before long, the owners of the motor car appeared in the inn. Eager to get a look at the vehicle, the Toad slipped out and sauntered round to the inn yard. There cannot be any harm, he said to himself, in my just looking at it. The car stood in the middle of the yard. Toad walked slowly round it. I wonder if this sort of car starts easily, he said to himself. Next moment, hardly knowing how it came about, he was hurtling along in someone else's motor car. So Toad was full of himself. He was conceited. He thought that he had done such a smart job in tricking Rat, and now he finds himself stealing someone's motor car. So now we don't even see the rest of that part of the story. We just see how it ends. Toad is now in crime and punishment. To my mind, observed the chair of the bench of magistrates, the only difficulty that presents itself is how we can sufficiently punish this rogue. He has been found guilty of stealing a motor car, of driving dangerously, and of gross impertinence to the rural police. Mr. Clerk, will you tell us what is the stiffest penalty we can impose on this villain? So gross means extreme, and impertinence means disrespect. So it was extremely disrespectful, the way Toad behaved to the police. The clerk scratched his nose. Supposing you were to say 12 months for theft, and 3 years for the furious driving, and 15 years for the cheek, so that means the extreme disrespect that he had towards the police. Those figures, if added together correctly, total up to 19 years. First rate, said the chairman. So you had better make it around 20 years, concluded the clerk. An excellent suggestion, said the chairman. Prisoner, it's going to be 20 years for you this time. And that's where we leave our story today. So what reasons do Badger, Rat, and Mole have to make Toad be more responsible? So why does Toad need to be more responsible? If you remember, he's a careless driver, and he's involved in several car accidents, and he even ends up in the hospital a few times. They want him to be more sensible about cars because it's causing him and other animals danger, and it's also giving them a bad reputation. Is their plan successful? No. Toad tricks Rat into thinking he's sick, and then Rat leaves the Toad unattended to search for a doctor and a lawyer. Toad improvises a rope with his sheets, and he's able to escape from his bedroom window. What happens to Toad at the end? He's found guilty of stealing a car and gross impertinence to the police, and he's sent to prison for 20 years. Do you think this punishment is fair? I want you to think about that. I'm going to ask you in your exit ticket today whether you think this punishment of 20 years is fair. And you probably need to weigh the harm that Toad has caused against the extreme punishment of 20 years. What do you think? Was it a fair punishment? And then after this sentence, do you think Toad's behavior will change? Do you think 20 years is enough to change Toad? I want you to answer these questions today in your exit ticket, so I'm going to let you decide what you think. Your next step, if this is in your assignment description, it might not be just like the last few days. If it is, you're going to complete the next part of the silent reading assessment. Just like the last several times, you're just reading the passage and answering some questions. If it is, you'll see it over here on the right side of your assignment. If it's not, your only step after this video is to complete the exit ticket I just mentioned. In your exit ticket, you will have some vocabulary, so some words to define. In the drop-down menu, you'll pick the word that best completes the sentence. And then on the next page, this will focus on Toad's punishment. So I'm going to ask you those questions again. Do you think Toad's punishment was fair? And do you think that this punishment will change his behavior? Please make sure that you answer each question using a complete sentence. Complete sentences include capitalization at the beginning of the sentence and for all proper nouns, so every name should be capitalized. And it also includes punctuation, so a period or exclamation point at the end. To find this, you'll need to go to Classwork, Week 3, September 21st through 25th. Find and click on Monday, September 21st, ELA. And both of these, or just one of them if you don't have this, will be linked in your assignment. And when you're done, don't forget to turn it in. That's it for today. If you have any questions, please be sure to contact me. Have a great rest of your Monday.